I'm James Cameron, and I want to take you into a world of cold, darkness, and unrelenting pressure. The movie business. Let's roll camera. This is scene 59, take one. And action.
The Roots of the Abyss dig deep into Cameron's childhood. His knack for science won him so many accolades that his teachers shipped him off to a lecture series at the University of Buffalo. One lecture, given by a diver, featured a documentary on liquid oxygen experiments.
Mouse can survive unharmed for hours, completely submerged. The mouse is breathing a special, highly oxygenated liquid chemical compound.
This idea, revolutionary for underwater exploration, aimed to help the human body withstand pressure changes. Though the experiments didn't yield groundbreaking results, they sparked the imagination of a 17-year-old Jacques Cousteau fan who penned a short story that very evening. A team of scientists testing liquid oxygen in an underwater lab.
They were going deeper and deeper and deeper, and they kept getting lost. In my story, the last guy has lost touch with the rescue operation that's gone down to find the others.
Fast forward 2 decades, that teenager, now one of America's hottest directors.
James Cameron.
Fox, the studio Cameron had rescued from financial ruin, was eager to fund any project he pitched. Instead of diving into the next blockbuster, James took a pause, contemplating his most ambitious idea yet. He spent vacations scuba diving in the Cayman Islands, not just for fun, but as prep for a screenplay based on that old story.
I love that story. Now, I can't find it. I know it's in some box somewhere, but then years later, I revisited that idea and started to write The Abyss as we now know it.
A nuclear submarine sinks under mysterious circumstances. Right. You've got a crew of oil rig divers on the bottom of the ocean who get called in to find out what the hell's going on. And they start coming in contact with another intelligence.
We talking little space friends here?
But no, this wasn't aliens underwater, no monsters bursting from the seafloor. The Abyss was the anti-aliens, where humans were the real monsters poised to destroy the world with their arms race and endless wars. Even the aliens would be the opposite of xenomorphs. No gaping maws ready to devour. Instead, eyes filled with horror as we tore each other apart. But enough philosophy. Cameron spun a complex plot around this concept. Storms, military, tough guys, psychotic breakdowns, alien contact, the threat of global annihilation, and a couple on the brink of divorce. Fox was all in.
The easiest way to describe The Abyss would be to say that this is an outer space adventure that takes place not in outer space, but at the bottom of the ocean.
The big question was how to film it. Any open water filming invited Murphy's Law. What could go wrong would go worse underwater.
There's no such thing as an easy shot underwater. Of course, I've always felt there's no such thing as an easy shot, but underwater, multiply that by 1,000.
Just look at Jaws. A 2-month shoot ballooned into nearly 6 with costs soaring. The shark broke down, lighting was a nightmare, the weather never cooperated.
It's not the time it takes to take the take that takes the time. It's the time it takes between the takes that takes the time that takes to take.
The only film with decent underwater scenes was The Deep, a Jaws cash-in.
And so I went to the guy that shot The Deep.
Enter Al Giddings, the giant of underwater cinematography and Cameron's first recruit.
His eyes were like a deer in the headlights. It's like, oh my God, how are we going to do this? Couldn't be building sets in the ocean. We looked at tanks. There was no tank big enough, no tank deep enough.
Typical Hollywood tanks were too small for Cameron's vision. Their ocean depths found an unlikely home, a half-built Cherokee nuclear power plant in South Carolina. Producer Earl Owensby had bought it to convert it into an indie studio and offered James its massive rectangular turbine pits.
And Al and I get out there and we look down. It's a giant tank. And we look at each other like, we're going to shoot in there.
It looked like it would work, and we called in engineers and said, can we turn this into a tank? Because it wasn't really a tank. It wasn't presented to us as a tank. All we knew that it was a big hole in the ground.
These pits, soon filled with 7.5 million gallons of water, would become Deep Core, the largest underwater set in movie history. It became their home for 2.5 grueling months. They also built tanks for miniatures and ventured to the world's largest underground lake, the Bon Terre Mine in Missouri. In a few months, Cameron turned a childhood fantasy into a tangible project. Next up, casting the main characters.
I told all the actors, when we cast a picture, look, you got to expect losses.
The problem, of course, was that no one takes you quite seriously until they're in the midst of it, and they realize what they've embarked on.
At the heart of The Abyss is a couple on the brink of breaking up, Bud and Lindsay. Cameron weaved a sincere and deep love story into this sci-fi epic, maybe drawing inspiration from his own life. He and Gail Hurd had lost their spark. The Abyss would reunite Bud and Lindsay, spoiler alert. But for Gail and James, it marked the final act of their marriage.
So I think our career followed, meeting, falling in love, and then we made The Abyss when we were divorcing.
But let's get back to the actors.
You could be more specific.
Fox wanted an A-list star for Deep Core's captain, suggesting Harrison Ford, Kurt Russell, and Mel Gibson. But Cameron chose Ed Harris.
Terribly sorry. What happened?
He was the real deal, looking every bit the rugged oil worker with piercing blue eyes.
All right, let's get ready to meet.
Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, who had charmed audiences in Scarface and The Color of Money, was cast as his wife.
I'm glad you're here.
I'm not.
Before filming, Cameron gave Mary and Ed a special gift. Sci-Fi author Orson Scott wrote 3 chapters detailing their characters' lives before the movie's events, helping them understand their relationship better.
You want to know what I think?
Not particularly.
Most other roles went to relatively unknown faces, but Cameron saved one part for an old friend, Michael Biehn. His crazed look became one of the Abyss's hallmarks.
What did you do to, keep your sanity during the shooting?
I'm not sure if I had my sanity.
Does this strike anyone as particularly psychotic, or is it just me?
Before filming, all actors went through diving courses and got their licenses.
And everything went fine. Ed turned out to be a gifted diver. Mary, not so much. But she did it. She was a total pro. The other actors, I remember, really enjoyed the helmet training.
I never really thought of that as work. To me, it was an experience like a lot of people won't ever have.
Within a week or so, it was like they were like every other commercial diver I've ever been around,
It was sort of like the glee that young soldiers have before they go to war. They got all their equipment, they're special. We knew we were special.
Excited at first, they admired the director, but within months, they were cursing him, realizing they were in for a tough ride.
We're going to be here a long time, because this is not going to be on schedule, I guarantee you that.
Let's go step by step. Locations chosen, actors cast. Now for the tricky part. Before filming could start, there were inventions to make, patents to file, and challenges to tackle that seemed like science fiction themselves.
There was always, you won't believe what's going to show up today.
First up, talking underwater.
I seem to be having a problem here.
Divers need their breathing apparatus, making clear dialogue tricky. Post-production dubbing is for wimps, so designer Ron Cobb, who had designed spaceships for aliens, created a helmet prototype supplying air from the side. Western Space and Marine took this design and made it work. By the start of filming, each actor and James had a helmet with an oxygen supply, microphone, and speaker. So yes, the actors really talked underwater.
Test, 1, 2, 3, 4. First recorded dialogue underwater on film for a theatrical motion picture in the history of the world.
The only tweak was adding bubbling sounds to replace technical noises.
Jim's talking and you got the...
Anyone in a helmet makes that sound. If they stop making that sound, we worry.
Next, lighting. Sunlight doesn't reach deep underwater, and any external light would ruin the illusion.
And the very stillness created an almost mirror surface. So we literally saw ourselves reflected in a giant 200-foot diameter mirror.
They covered the massive pool with a tent and filled it with millions of tiny black plastic beads to block the light.
We used beads instead of something laying in the water because of the safety factor. We had to be able to surface at any moment if we had a problem, especially diving with actors.
A severe storm later destroyed the tent, forcing night shoots, and those pesky beads turned into the crew's nightmare. finding their way into everything.
That all of us, I'm sure, have somewhere tucked deep in the folds of our bodies still to this day.
Cameron used the lamps on the underwater base, submersibles, and divers' helmets for light.
I mean, you had technologies where you had to bring motion picture lights down into the water and not kill anyone with electric bolts. You know, it was a lot of power down there.
All my life I was told, like, don't stand in a puddle of water and turn a light on because you'll get electrocuted. They were able to take these huge lights underwater and light completely underwater.
The Abyss, we had the first underwater HMI lights. Pete Romano and Rich Mula developed these beautiful HMI lights. I don't think Jim could have lit that set without those.
This marvel not only passed Cameron's test, but soon lit up other film sets, National Geographic documentaries, and NASA training pools.
Like a dance of light.
With underwater speech and lighting sorted out, the next challenge was filming it all. On land, smooth shots come from cranes or tracks, but underwater, it's trickier. Cameron's brother Mike, a mechanical engineer, designed the Sea Wasp, a device propelling a user underwater. It could hit 3 knots, easily move up and down, pull 2 people, and let the cameraman focus on the shot. The brothers patented the device, and James rewarded Mike with a cameo as a drowned submariner with a crab crawling out of his mouth. Ew.
Oh, jeez.
Filming The Abyss was set to start in August of 1988, but the sets under construction since April lagged behind. Deep core was being finished while the tank filled with water, a process that took over a week.
It's an historic moment.
Set decorators worked waist deep in water on the station while Cameron shot miniatures of the submarine and the alien ship in a nearby tank. The submersibles, 1/4 scale models, had all the functionalities of full-size vessels. They had engines, moved underwater at 4 knots, and withstood collisions. Steve Johnson's team, known for Ghostbusters, created the alien puppets. Cameron wanted glowing aliens, so each puppet had hundreds of fiber optic bundles all gathered into a main cable on the figure's back, lit by a powerful projector with moving colored filters. Up to 40 puppeteers operated these intricate creations.
But when you have to actually make it function underwater, it's a whole other story. I mean, water basically just adds a level of difficulty to any human endeavor, no matter what it is.
The crown jewel of the props was the 7-ton model of the Benthic Explorer, filmed at sea.
The surface craft that was created was so large it actually had to get a Coast Guard license number, even though it was a quote-unquote miniature.
By late August, filming finally began. Grueling 16-hour days were spent almost entirely underwater.
Now, the dive shooting is really exhausting. It's got to be the biggest sort of physical and mental challenge I've ever had because I've got to do all my normal stuff, and then I've got to do it underwater, in a medium 800 times denser than air.
Oxygen tanks were refilled on site, and actors sometimes spent up to 5 hours underwater without a break.
Well, I'm sure somebody else talked about this. It was something called Diver's Delight. When you're down there for 3 or 4 hours, there's certain hygiene considerations that come up.
Diver's Delight, of course, that's pissing in your wetsuit. It all went down your leg and came up on your body, and it just felt really warm. It was a nice feeling. Everybody did it, 45 people pissing in their wetsuits. I mean, it was amazing.
Cameron often stayed in the tank all day. After long periods at a depth of 10 meters, he needed an hour for decompression. Decompression involves stops at various depths to safely ascend and prevent decompression sickness by allowing gases to escape tissues. But James didn't waste time. He reviewed the day's footage and handled studio calls during that period. Pressure wasn't the only danger. Continuous exposure to chlorine gave all the divers severe itching and changed their hair color.
Everybody got their hair bleached white. The hair fell off our arms, and we all got chlorine burns, and it was borderline kind of having to go to the hospital. It was just hell. And that's how we started. And then it goes.
It sucks.
Drowning was the biggest fear.
We did have one incident where I almost drowned.
Cameron himself had a close call. His oxygen tank was nearly empty, but he wasn't informed, even though protocol required a 15-minute warning.
Jim, check your air for me, will you?
His air supply suddenly ran out, and he couldn't call for help. Tearing off his helmet, destroying the expensive equipment inside, he swam to the surface. A safety diver noticed him and, thinking Cameron was panicking, grabbed him and offered an oxygen hose. Unfortunately, it was faulty and filled Cameron's lungs with water. Unable to communicate the problem, Cameron punched the diver and freed himself. Miraculously, he made it to the surface. After coughing up water, he fired the AD responsible for monitoring his tank and the diver who hadn't checked the hose. Then he demanded a new helmet and went back to work.
I always say to everybody at the beginning of a movie, welcome to my nightmare. My imagination is now going to be your enslavement for the next few months.
Despite this nightmare, Cameron was at least an experienced diver. The actors had much less experience and faced even tougher challenges.
Here we go. Take a deep breath, Emmy.
They performed dangerous stunts themselves.
And regulator out. And action, action.
Master Antonio held her breath for one scene.
That's a cut.
While Harris and Leo Burmester did the same and swam 40 feet. Only when they signaled they couldn't breathe did rescue divers come to their aid from off-screen.
So he's not going to be there the second you go like this, but it seemed like an eternity. It certainly expanded our ideas of what we could do.
Harris had the worst luck. Remember the liquid oxygen from Cameron's teenage story? It made it into the abyss, but it doesn't actually work in real life. So Bud's helmet in the final part of the movie was filled with dyed water.
Fluid breathing suit. Are you actually breathing under the liquid? No, you just pretend.
Harris held his breath and wore special contact lenses to see underwater. In one take, the safety diver responsible for his air hose got tangled in cables.
Did this sign, out of air, unhook myself, get over to the wall. I got no air. I'm waiting for air, and this guy's hung up somewhere. I got nobody to give me air.
When Harris signaled he couldn't breathe, another diver rushed in but inserted the hose upside down, causing Harris to inhale water twice.
And for a split second, I really thought I was a goner, and then Al came swimming over. The cameraman put his regulator in the right way, took a big breath, and went, oh, man, okay, let's go up for a second. But I remember driving home that night, and I just broke down, man. I was just weeping. And I really thought I was gonna die for a second. And though it never got that dangerous again, I always knew I was gonna have to go back down in this fucking fluid breathing suit.
6 months later, during the promo tour for The Abyss, journalists asked Harris how actors were treated on the set, and he replied, "It's like asking a soldier how he was treated in Vietnam."
Maybe the conception of going into a giant filming tank and doing all this stuff and putting actors in helmets was a dumb idea. It seemed cool at the time.
Cameron ruled the set with an iron fist, running it like a dictatorship. In his relentless pursuit of the perfect shot, he pushed everyone to the brink with take after take.
And also because of the fact that Jim's a perfectionist. He wants it over and over and over.
Grueling scenes dragged on until James was satisfied with every minuscule detail.
I can sort of make the cognitive leap to what the end picture will look like. You know, it always is a glorious picture. It's the steps to get there, you know, that sometimes are pretty grueling.
The crew's morale hit rock bottom, and they scribbled abuse over abyss on their script covers. The boiling point arrived during Lindsay's resuscitation scene. All the key actors nailed an incredible performance from the first take, but Harris's hand obscured Master Antonio's face. Cameron, ever the perfectionist, ordered a reshoot. Another torturous take followed, where the character's raw nerves contrasted sharply with Lindsay's lifeless body. Then disaster struck. The camera operator ran out of film at the worst possible moment.
She just said, hey man, we are not animals.
She runs off the set. You know, it's like, who could blame her?
Jim was pretty speechless because he knew she had every right to feel the way she was feeling, but didn't know what to say to her, you know.
They had to film the rest of the scene without her. The film's emotional peak close-ups of Bud crying and screaming had Ed Harris acting alongside a bag of sand as his partner.
There's a camera there with a big hole cut, you know, down below the floor. It's a pretty amazing piece of work.
Incidentally, not long after filming The Abyss, she drastically changed her approach to selecting roles. She abandoned big studio projects, opting only for passion projects every few years. Maybe it's a coincidence, just like the fact that none of the Abyss's actors ever worked with Cameron again.
Look, partner, we don't work for you. We don't take orders from you. And we don't much like you.
Even the animals didn't escape the stress. For the scene demonstrating the effects of liquid oxygen, they used 5 rats. And yes, they performed the experiment for real. Cameron consulted with Johan Kilstra, a top researcher in the field, who provided all the necessary knowledge to recreate the experiment on camera. The liquid was heated to the rat's body temperature and saturated with oxygen for a day.
And then I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to film it, which is probably not so smart because we probably should have done it off in a corner someplace in case it didn't work, but it worked. Meanwhile, the whole crew's standing around going, holy shit.
Damn rat's breathing that shit. That is no bullshit, hands down, the goddamnest thing I ever saw.
5 rats played the part of Beanie, each enduring the liquid container. The first 4 times went smoothly, but the last rat emerged from the tank lifeless. I thought, oh shit, I'm not going to be able to get that little disclaimer at the end which says no animals were harmed in the making of this film. Not with all these witnesses. To save the day, James performed mouth-to-mouth on the rat, revived it, and took it home as a pet. For real.
He lived long enough to be around for the writing of Terminator 2, so he was okay.
Despite the happy ending, animal rights activists criticized the film, leading to the scene being cut from the theatrical release in 7 countries, including the UK.
Because the royal veterinarian felt that it was painful for the rats or something like that. I don't know how he knows that.
Ironically, despite all the technical breakthroughs, the impressive practical effects, The Abyss secured its place in history because of one computer graphics scene. Yes, I'm talking about the water tentacle that skillfully mimicked the faces of the main characters. This relatively simple effect by today's standards changed the course of cinematic history. Before The Abyss, CGI was mostly a stylistic tool used for opening credits or the stunning but unrealistic effects in Tron. The closest to realism came from a small effects division of George Lucas's company, a little firm called Pixar. Young John Lasseter and his team created a stained glass character for young Sherlock Holmes. When Lucas sold the company to Steve Jobs, Dennis Muren stepped in. Dennis, one of the founders of Industrial Light and Magic, ILM, the visual effects company that brought Star Wars to life, believed ILM needed its own CGI department. The Abyss was the project that would prove Muren right.
Jim was hesitant about talking to a big company like us because he's a very much hands-on person and thought he would lose control. But we're ready for something really big, and that was the perfect project.
Dennis showed Cameron some test animations, primitive but promising, and warned that the final result consisting of 20 shots wouldn't be ready for 9 months. Considering the best idea up to that point had been
claymation with white clay, and we'd project high-speed photography of water,
James agreed to Muren's gamble.
So he had to send John Knoll out to babysit us and make sure we didn't screw up too badly.
That was something very new for us. There were not a lot of established procedures for doing any of this work at the time, so we just dove into it and we were making it up as we went along. One of the challenges was that water is a combination of reflection and refraction. For refraction, we were going to use the background plate and distort it. But for reflection, over the course of the couple of days of shooting, I would have photographed every part of the set. But then you had to seam them all together into an environment.
Boom, Photoshop.
So we took all the images in the computer and we built in a little room, and that water tank, now it's refracting and reflecting the world.
That has become so ubiquitous today, came out of Jim pushing things for The Abyss. And if you look today on the credits of Photoshop, you will still see John Knoll's name.
It's wonderful.
The final result not only amazed the director, but also opened new horizons for filmmakers, allowing them to create not just effects, but entire worlds. A fact Cameron would later take full advantage of. Yes, 20 years later, 9 months would be needed for 2,000 shots in Avatar.
Not any easier, by the way, just faster.
But just 2 years after The Abyss, that water tentacle paved the way for the creation of the T-1000, and one of the greatest sequels in history. But back to The Abyss. After 140 grueling shooting days, it was time for post-production. Many effects still weren't ready. Test screenings included hand-drawn sketches of waves in the final scenes. No surprise, audiences laughed at the most dramatic moments.
All right, well, let's screen the one without the wave. That'll be better. And it's like, it wasn't any better.
Fox had spent over $45 million on the film, even by conservative estimates. And this wasn't the reaction they'd hoped for.
And then we thought, well, at least we could save money if we released the one without the wave.
Cameron wanted to show viewers the horrors humanity commits, addressing issues of genocide and war, while Fox wanted a summer blockbuster.
20th Century Fox hopes it's not placing $50 million plus into an abyss. This star-studded premiere in New York is but part of the studio's costly publicity splash for the movie, in hopes of helping the abyss ride the wave of big money summer movie blockbusters.
On August 9th, 1989, The Abyss hit theaters without the wave scenes and the parts focusing on humanity's sins, for which the aliens intended to punish us. I'll admit I've only seen the director's cut, which came out 4 years later with an additional $500,000 in funding. So I can't imagine the confusion of the audiences who left the theater after the premiere.
I think the film's really good for the first 2 hours. I think the last 10 minutes or so is really embarrassing.
Now, many people were bothered by the ending of The Abyss. One person told us it was stupid. Someone else said they'd seen it all done before and done better.
The Abyss became Cameron's first box office flop. At the Oscars, it won just one award for Best Visual Effects. But let's be honest, for 9 out of 10 directors, The Abyss would be the pinnacle of their career, something they would talk about at Comic-Con booths into their old age. For Cameron, it was just a valuable learning experience. I knew this was going to be a hard shoot, but even I had no idea just how hard. I don't ever want to go through this again.
It doesn't need to be done again. It's being done.
Don't let our content sink. Like, subscribe, and comment as we submerge into the next James Cameron epic.